positive conversation. We look forward to tightening up the border. All the premiers agree, the Prime Minister agrees, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Well, I just take the positive approach. We're all in this together as Team Canada, and we'll get this done.
They have a lot to disagree about, but premiers across Canada are saying they're united against U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threat. The premiers met with the Prime Minister yesterday to strategize, and a consensus emerged. Give Trump the action he wants on the border to avoid crushing economic pain. So they've got an alliance, but do they have a plan? Wab Kinew is the Premier of Manitoba, and he joins me now. Premier Kinew, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me back.
There was some criticism of the federal government going into the meeting last night that they didn't seem to have a plan to deal with Donald Trump and his threat of tariffs. How do you feel about the preparation levels of the federal government after last night's meeting?
Well, my job is to protect Manitoba jobs and to protect Manitoba interests. So we've actually been preparing for a potential Trump administration since before we assumed office. We, during our election campaign, announced that former ambassador and former Premier Gary Dewar would be our U.S. trade advisor. Earlier this year, we went down to D.C. We've been down to states to visit and strengthen relationships. So we've been getting ready for quite some time. And, you know, given what President-elect Trump has announced earlier this week, it just shows how serious this moment is. And so as we talk about Team Canada, that term that's on everyone's top of mind this week, I think it's really important to understand that premiers, myself included, are playing a leadership role when it comes to Team Canada.
But do you think Team Canada has a plan at the federal level? Because the issues that President-elect Trump is specifically talking about are migrants coming across the border from Canada to the U.S. and fentanyl. That's the federal government's job. They would argue that it is not as big a problem at the Canada-U.S. border as President-elect Trump likes to say it is. But are you convinced they have a plan that can ease these concerns of Donald Trump?
Well, I don't think we're going to argue our way out of this situation. We have to show action. And so that was the content that I really advanced in the call yesterday. I said, listen, what's the downside here? Manitobans, Canadians want action on the drug crisis. They want drug traffickers to be held accountable. We want to have safety when it comes to the border. So let's get those resources in place. For sure, we welcome additional investments, whether that's RCMP or other law enforcement resources at the border. But we need more of those law enforcement resources in our own communities, right here at home. Because when we see what's going on in Winnipeg, across rural Manitoba, as it is in the rest of the prairies, the rest of the country, there is a real need to crack down on drug trafficking and to hold people accountable. So if we can meet the needs of our own citizens here at home with action on law enforcement that they've been demanding for a long time, and also send a message to our most important trading partner that we're on the same page, I think it's the win-win situation that everybody looks for when we're talking about the Canada-U.S. relationship.
So that's not necessarily, am I reading that not necessarily as a validation of Donald Trump's claims, but let's show him we're listening to him because at the same time it benefits us? You're not necessarily saying that the president-elect is right that the border is a problem?
Well, the president-elect won a free and fair election in the U.S., and he is the partner, the dance partner that we have. At the same time, we as premiers, we have those state-level partnerships with the governors, with the people in the Senate, the House of Representatives. So I think that the premiers are going to have a really important role to play as we look ahead to strengthening trade, as we look ahead to protecting jobs in Manitoba and in the other provinces and territories. And the other thing that I, shared in the call yesterday, and I'd like to share with your viewers, is that there's a bigger context here too, which is China. And so for sure, this threat of tariffs with the United States of America is something we have to take serious, and we have to prepare to protect our jobs and to protect that trade relationship. But we also know that we as a country have this trade situation, trade dynamic with the People's Republic of China, and that the U.S. themselves are reorienting their posture when it comes to China. And so while we guard against an economic threat that tariffs might present to us here in the future of Canada, I also ask for the Prime Minister and for the federal government to have a clear strategy when it comes to the relationship with China, because again, this is an important agricultural export market. It's important as an export destination for so many goods that power the Canadian economy. But at the same time, we have to look at our national security interest and our trade relationship with our most important ally, which is the United States of America. So really there's a multi-dimensional situation that we need to navigate through as Canadians. And, you know, with my interest representing the people of Manitoba, I want to make sure that our agricultural exports are going to continue to drive our economy here in the province, that our energy exports are going to continue to be strong, but that we're also fulfilling our obligations when it comes to military spending, that we're also going to be a strong security partner when it comes to border security, national security, energy security, Arctic security, all of which are big priorities for the incoming Trump administration.
These are all big priorities, but they're also big ticket items that will take, multiple years to accomplish. But the clock is ticking down to January 20th, which is the inauguration, and that is the tariff deadline day, according to what the president-elect has said on social media. So what do you need to see or want to see from the Trudeau government between now and the 20th of January that you think can head this tariff war off at the pass?
Well, I think that hitting the 2% spending target when it comes to the military, when it comes to the Canadian Armed Forces, I think that that's just table stakes. And I don't think that Mr. Trump is going to care much about a promise after his term in office. It really has to come within that 4-year period where he's going to be there. At the same time, like I said, we're not going to be able to argue our way out of this thing. We have to show action. And so drugs, the border, military, national security priorities, these are areas where we can work together as Canadians to meet our own needs here at home, while also sending a strong signal to the U.S. that we're serious about becoming even closer, even more tightly integrated when it comes to the economy in the future. So if you look here in our backyard, if you make investments in the Canadian Armed Forces, that's going to lead to more jobs in the aerospace industry here. It's going to lead to more personnel at our Canadian Armed Forces bases. All these things benefit our province, our local economy. All the other premiers will have similar cases that they can make about investments in their regions. Plus, it's going to show our important trading partner and ally that we're serious about strengthening ties.
No, look, and I get that, and I know the premiers took that position when you met in Halifax in the summer at the Council of the Federation meeting, but this is specifically about fentanyl and migrants, according to the president-elect, and there's less than 60 days or so in round numbers to get there. So what specific things can the federal government do to show a seriousness on the border on fentanyl, even though it's only 43 pounds or something of fentanyl that was intercepted crossing the border? What can they do by January 20th that you think could satisfy President-elect Trump?
Well, let's not forget that this is all happening in a broader context. So let's get those law enforcement resources on drugs and on the border, but also let's have a clear strategy when it comes to China. Let's invest in our military, our Canadian Armed Forces. I think these are all things that we need to show a strong signal on immediately, right away. When we think about the potential impacts that these tariffs could have on our Canadian economy here in Manitoba, that's just not something that we can accept as a foregone conclusion. We have to show action. We have to show decisive direction in terms of us being serious about security. And of course, us as premiers, we're taking those steps, right? We're taking the steps to strengthen the trade relationships, the economic ties with the United States of America. We're showing through our investments in local law enforcement and the steps that we can take when it comes to cracking down on drug trafficking that we mean business. And so if we all work together on these priorities when it comes to drugs, border, China, and military investment, that's how Team Canada can put the puck in the net, as they say.
Well, working together, when all of this sort of started, though, Doug Ford went public very quickly and talked about the need to start bilateral negotiations on trade with the U.S. and cut Mexico out of the agreement. Danielle Smith and Doug Ford have both said that Donald Trump's concerns are legitimate about what's happening at the border. Is it working together when you have two very important economic provinces saying things like that publicly as the president-elect is threatening to sideswipe the Canadian economy?
We heard concerns about state-owned enterprises operating in Mexico when we visited D.C. Earlier in the year. So I think what my fellow colleagues around the Premier's table are highlighting is a live concern. This is a real topic of conversation in D.C., and you can bet that the incoming Trump administration is going to be thinking about these things. So, of course, we have to have that being ahead of where the puck is going to go mentality as Canadians. And when it comes to that clear strategy, when it comes to our relationship with China, and ensuring that our economy is going to be strong and that we're going to be looking after our own national security and economic security interests, that's where I think the federal government can continue to play an important role. We as provinces are going to be working to have access to these export markets and these trade destinations, but the federal government also needs to send a clear signal when it comes to both that, but also the priorities on drug enforcement, the border, and the military.
But is it helpful, Premier, just as, I guess as a final point, in a situation like this, to have multiple points of view out there as you're trying to do the Team Canada approach of saying, let's drop Mexico from the trade arrangement, or Danielle Smith saying Trump is right about the border? Is that a helpful thing in the context of what the country is facing?
Well, David, I'd offer you this. You think about that cough table, the Premier's table. You've got Conservatives, you got New Democrats, you got Liberals, you even got two nonpartisan premiers sitting around that table, and we are united. So right now, Canadians are often looking for a way to get past the division and the polarization that we see in politics. I actually think the cough table is a useful example for how we can work together for common cause with a shared interest. And I can tell you that my colleagues and I, as premiers of the provinces and territories, are united. We absolutely have to protect our jobs here in Manitoba and across Canada. In order to do so, we need to show the serious actions that we're taking when it comes to drug enforcement, border security, the military, and of course the broader international strategy that we're going to be pursuing. So the premiers are very much united, and I think that as we head into a Trump administration, we're prepared to take that leadership role, and I think it's going to be an important time for provincial and territorial leaders to represent our country in a good way.
Are you united on the idea of retaliatory tariffs if it comes to that, if Trump goes ahead with this?
I think the first thing that we have to do is show action on our priority areas. The first thing that we have to do is say, listen, Manitobans and Canadians want us to take action on drug trafficking. So what's the downside of doing that? Manitobans and Canadians want us to have a secure Arctic, want us to have a secure source of energy in the future. So what's the downside in communicating those things and backing it up with the necessary investments to secure those resources for future generations? So when we talk about Canada-U.S. trade, for generations it's always been described as a win-win. And I think in the current context, with Trump 2.0 administration, what the win-win looks like is us securing those needed investments and priorities that benefit the people here at home in Canada and in Manitoba, while also sending that strong signal to the U.S. that we are their most important trading partner, trusted ally, and a good friend to top it all off.
Wab Kinew, Premier of Manitoba, always appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
President-elect Donald Trump's tariff threat is accomplishing something few issues can in Canada, uniting politicians across the country. The premiers met with the Prime Minister to strategize last night.
A positive conversation. We look forward to tightening up the border. All the premiers agree. The Prime Minister agrees.
There was strong alignment around the table for a unified approach and a Team Canada approach.
I think that we've all accepted that when the incoming President-elect Trump states what he wants from you, he's being serious about it.
But Alberta and Newfoundland and Labrador have been quick to note their other disputes with the federal government, and Ontario says Ottawa is stuck on its back foot on Trump's border concerns. So, could the unity fracture before Team Canada takes action? Andrew Furey is the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador, and he joins me now. Premier, good to see you again. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David.
After the meeting last night, the Premier of Quebec, François Legault, said he didn't get a clear answer on Ottawa's border plans. Did you? Do you know what the federal government's going to do here?
Well, look, I think last night was a good opportunity. It was a productive call. It was what I would say was a cohesive call. There was a common understanding of the urgency, and there was an equal respect for the necessity of us to work together and the shared responsibility in dealing with this. I will say that the Minister of Public Safety in particular did commit to border patrol, as I'm sure you've heard, his public commentary. And I think there was a common understanding from the Prime Minister and everybody on the call that their border was a significant issue and needed more robust measures in place. My position is that is for the protection of Canadians as well. I don't succumb to this position by the President that this is a unidirectional problem. Having strong borders is equally important for Canadians as it is for Americans. Any opportunity there is to pick up fentanyl or illegal arms or illegal immigrants, that we should all be supporting that. And both sides of the border can be doing a better job in supporting that at the border.
So is the border a big issue for you because it's a problem in its own right, or is it a big issue because Donald Trump has said it's a problem and he's going to impose tariffs if it's not dealt with to his satisfaction?
Well, look, it's not unusual for the president to conflate issues and intentionally confuse issues. Of course, you would have to ask him why he would use the two together, but I've said in the past, putting a tariff on a 25% tariff on crab or putting a 25% tariff on energy is not going to solve the complex issues of the border. The border issue is necessarily an issue. It's an issue for Canadians and it's an issue for Americans. And it deserves an adult, mature conversation about how to deal with it. Slapping tariffs on crab is not going to solve the flow of fentanyl both ways on our border. But that is a particularly important issue that deserves the attention of both federal governments. But putting tariffs on goods and services is only going to increase the price at the pump, it's going to increase the price in the checkout line, and it's going to increase the price of electricity for Americans.
I promise I will try to get that clarification directly from Donald Trump the next time he's on the show, but I'm not sure how likely that is.
Good luck.
Yeah, I wonder, Premier, though, we have seen people like Danielle Smith suggest that Donald Trump's right here and has a point, and she's also suggested that maybe Justin Trudeau isn't the right guy to lead these negotiations. Do you think the premiers are all together with the Prime Minister after the meeting last night, or do you think there's still a bit of an outlier there with Alberta?
I think that there was a unified Team Canada approach on that call last night. I think it's important that everybody understand, I think everybody did understand, especially under the leadership of Premier Ford, that it's important to be cohesive. Take the President and the Prime Minister out of the equation. If you're in any negotiation, it's a age-old strategy to divide and conquer. If the President sees a fractured Canada, then that is only going to allow him to extract more value on tariffs, value on other items, perhaps that he has in his mind right now, than if we had a cohesive, unified front. That doesn't mean, by the way, that for domestic issues we all agree. Like you are well aware, I don't agree with the Prime Minister on many different items, including the carbon tax, Northern Cod, other equalization, other things. But on this particular front, I think we do need to be united. We need to be united, though, respecting the regional sensitivities and specificities of industries in our own provinces. And that is not to the exclusion of conversations across the border from premiers or expressing opinions of premiers. I think it's important, in fact, the Prime Minister did encourage that we reach out and leverage our own relationships. Right. I know, for example, I've already contacted the governor of Massachusetts, had discussions with her and the governor of Vermont, and have asked for a meeting, an urgent meeting of the New England governors and Eastern premiers to discuss this tariff issue. So
you say, despite the regional tensions and the domestic issues that there is obviously not alignment on, you think broadly people are on board. So I guess I wonder then, Premier, what have you all agreed that needs to be done between now and the 20th of January? Because the clock is ticking down to that. I mean, what do you need to see the Prime Minister do to satisfy the President-elect here?
Well, I think the border issue is prominent. I think the President has said that. But again, I don't want Canadians to succumb to the narrative that this is a unidirectional issue. A strong border works for Canada and it works for Americans. And I think that showing a strategic approach to enhancing border security is one that would be well received by Canadians and Americans alike. Anytime there's a moment there's a place, there's a moment in time, there's a geographic location in which we can extract illegal activity from society. I think it's incumbent upon all of us to enhance those measures. And I'm confident that Minister LeBlanc in particular understood that, took it as a very serious feedback, and has already shown leadership in acting on it.
There was some criticism, though, going into the meeting last night. Doug Ford said right before he went into his office that he feels like the federal government's been on the back foot here and doesn't have a plan. Now, the 25% tariff with these conditions was something completely new from Donald Trump. It's not anything we'd heard leading up to this, because it was a 10 to 20% tariff at various points. Do you think they have a plan? Do you think they've been caught off guard here? Because Trump does these things, as we saw in the 4 years he was in power before, and he says things that he doesn't necessarily follow through on. But do you think the federal government has a plan to deal with this particular threat and the return of Donald Trump to the White House?
I do, but to the premise of one of the pieces of your question, it's almost impossible to plan for chaos. You can have a strategy to deal with potential issues, but one of the environments in which the president has shown that he can succeed quite well is in creating conflict and chaos, and you never know which lever he's going to pull. I'm confident with a unified approach we can overcome that through diplomatic channels, but I do think, David, it will require conversations on both sides of the border to ensure that Americans understand the impact that it will have on them and their pocketbooks, on the grocery lineups, the gas pumps. 25% tariff, for example, from things that come from Newfoundland and Labrador, whether it's electrons and electricity production, oil and gas, or our seafood exports, will add significant costs to Americans, to their tables, to their electricity bills, to their grocery lines. And I think that we need to communicate that to them. I'm married to an American, and happy Thanksgiving to every American out there. My in-laws are American. My kids have dual citizenship. I did some of my surgical training in the United States. I can tell you that they are not going to tolerate a sudden 25% increase on their electricity bills in Boston, for example, on January 22nd. So really need to get the message out that we want to work with the administration. I think there are diplomatic routes to be successful there, but we have to have the courage as leaders of a sovereign country to ensure that we are standing up for what's just, and for what's right, and for what's fair for workers in our communities, the families, and the industries that they represent. Yeah, look, the economics of these tariffs make no sense and run counter to Donald Trump's goals of lowering costs for American consumers, right? But your final point there as a sovereign country of standing up, there's going to be a need to retaliate should he not be deterred and he goes ahead with this. So is there alignment, do you think, at the First Minister's table of retaliatory tariffs the way there were when steel and aluminum were hit, but across the board against the U.S.? Well, look, I think it needs to be contemplated. I think it should be a part of the strategy. But, of course, any strategic thinking doesn't put all the cards on the table all at once. I do think we have an opportunity in the fact that the president has conflated two, I would argue, unrelated issues to solve this without a significant trade war. I don't think anyone will win in a trade war. I do think Americans and Canadians alike will win by strengthening our borders. Premier Andrew Furey of Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you for your time today, sir. Thanks, David. Today, Quebec's Premier François Legault said he was happy with the response from Minister LeBlanc and Minister Chrystia Freeland, saying they seem to understand the message that Canada needs a plan to secure the border. Quebec had previously been calling for such a plan. For more on Quebec's reaction, Christopher Skeete is Quebec's Minister for the Economy, and he is part of the province's task force looking at the possible economic threats posed by the incoming Trump administration. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Your task force is going to be busy with the possible economic threats posed by the Trump administration. Quebec's full reaction to what we saw last night, because I know the Premier said he's happy that the Fed seem to be taking it seriously, but also said he still isn't quite sure what the plan is. Where do things stand from the Quebec perspective?
I think that's exactly it. I mean, we're happy to see that there's at least finally some recognition that more needs to be done on the border. But, you know, we have 6 weeks before these tariffs, these threatened tariffs become a real thing. Why not use this time to actually make progress on some of these issues that have been front of mind for a lot of Canadians for a long time now. So I think it's an opportunity for us to look introspectively at how things are going on our border. This is something the Quebec government has been very vocal about over the past couple of years. I see this as a unique opportunity for us to actually make some movement there.
Focus on the border. And I know, look, Quebec with Roxham Road, I was one of the reporters there in the very early days with our camera seeing what was happening. But that's coming from south to north. Donald Trump's worried about things going from north to south. Do you share his concern that there's a problem with people and drugs going to the United States in a way that's actually a threat to the U.S. national security?
I would say that it's a reality. I wouldn't try to measure the exact reality, but there are bi-directional issues on the border, and there is more that we can be doing to alleviate some of the concerns that of our southern neighbors. And I think if we were known and were seen as being responsible on our border, probably we wouldn't have to deal with this situation the way we're dealing with it now. So we think it's a unique opportunity to maybe seize the moment and get more serious about our border control on the Canadian border. And I think, as a former customs officer, I know firsthand, in the past life where I was a customs officer, I could tell you firsthand that more can definitely be done there.
Okay, so get more serious. What does that look like? Because Donald Trump has linked this all to two very specific things, the flow of people and the flow of fentanyl. And while that does happen, it is nowhere near what he sees at the southern U.S. border, where the volumes from Mexico are just enormous compared to what you see coming from Canada on an annual basis. So what does getting more serious on the border look like between now and January 20th to head off these tariffs?
You're 100% right that there's no comparison between the southern border of Mexico and the Canadian border. However, facts don't lie. There is an increase in seizures and there is an increase in illegitimate migration between the two borders. So I think there are legitimate concerns that need to be addressed on both sides of the border. And this is something that requires for us to work together. And we see it as an opportunity to get ahead of this menace, of this tariff menace. So maybe if we show a plan, maybe if we show that we're getting serious about it, maybe we can avoid them altogether. So our position is this is a unique opportunity to get serious about our border, and why not seize it? I think Canadians from coast to coast are asking for this.
But are there quick and easy fixes, Minister, that you can do? I mean, you're a former border officer, as you said, or a customs officer. I mean, you can hire more, but I guess it takes some time to train them up and get them in place. I mean, what are the quick and easy things you can do with a border this big to demonstrate seriousness by Inauguration Day?
Well, I think, putting your money where your mouth is, of course, is an obvious way. I think if you were to show that you're hiring more, if you're going to open more places at the colleges at Rigaud for customs school, if you're going to open up more places in Regina for RCMP officers, if you're going to show an increase in budget aligned with that emergency funding, these are the types of things I think that would go a long way towards alleviating some of the problems that people perceive at the Canadian border. And in general, I think we do need to take our border security a little bit more serious. So I think, like I said, I see this more of a challenge, but it is also an opportunity for us to get serious about something that in Quebec anyway has lasting impacts on our ability to deliver services to Quebecers. So we think that this is an opportune time, and we also think, why not use these 6 weeks to actually show a plan and show that we're going to get serious about it?
Well, what you've heard to this point from Minister LeBlanc, for example, about drones maybe to help with surveillance on the border, extra staff deployed there, hiring of more police officers down the road. Is that a good start as far as Quebec is concerned in terms of responding to this threat?
I think it's a good start. I think we need to have a further conversation about it, though. And I think if we want to have a serious plan, we also need to get together. Where I agree with the federal government is that this is going to be a team effort. We need to get together and have serious discussions about what's important for each province and how we want to move forward. For instance, we want to have an emissary present during the negotiations to make sure that the issues that touch Quebec are brought to the forefront. We have a particular commercial balance with the United States that's pretty high, and we're concerned that we could be slapped with tariffs. So before that happens, we want to make sure that we have a seat at the table to talk about our aluminum industry, our aerospace industry, things that maybe other provinces don't have as a priority. We want to make sure that we have that place. So right now, it's time to have a discussion and get serious. And I think if we can have that mantra together, I think we can maybe even avoid these tariffs of 25% when he does come to power.
A seat at the table, an emissary, as you called it, for which conversations? The tariff one or the NAFTA reopening in 2026, or is it both?
Yeah, it would be both. The idea is to have that voice heard from the Quebec perspective, to make sure that things that touch us, for instance, when in the last Trump presidency, he slapped 10% tariffs on aluminum. Because we were able to demonstrate that the cars that they're building in North Carolina actually require Quebec aluminum, we were able to remove those tariffs. So because we were close by, because we had the argument, because we were ready to make the case of this deeply intertwined border that we have, we saw an opportunity and we were able to remove the tariffs in a timely fashion. So we think it's an opportunity to have the conversation, which is one of the reasons why we want to have a seat at the table.
Well, okay, the task force that you're a part of, looking at the economic threats posed by the U.S. administration, I mean, that goes beyond the 25% tariff, I would presume, because Mr. Trump is a very protectionist sort of minded president, and I know he's taken aim at supply management and the dairy sector in the past. I mean, are you worried that that becomes a target for the president-elect in the NAFTA renegotiations that start in 2026? What other sectors are you worried about right now?
I have to tell you, David, we've been worried for a while now because both Democrats and Republicans have signaled an increased desire for protectionist measures, which is one of the reasons why my colleague Martine Biron, we're lucky in Quebec that we have delegations in the United States, kind of like the Quebec houses. And we have 8 of them right now. We increased by 22 people over the last year the number of staff that we have there working for Quebec on behalf of Quebecers. And we also increased our delegation in Washington, D.C. to have these conversations with both Republicans and Democrats. There's this undercurrent in the United States that seems to forget how deeply intertwined we are at the border. We need to remind our American friends of how our fates are intertwined. And when they actually try to protect themselves, they may inadvertently hurt themselves. So our strategy is to keep the communication open and to make sure that they realize how mutually dependent we each are on each other's economies. And I think if we can do that, we might be able to avoid the situations of having tariffs in the first place. And one of the things is to listen to the legitimate concerns that they have about borders. And I think, it's not a big ask, especially with a couple weeks headway.
Yeah, look, the economic underpinning of the tariff idea makes no sense for the Americans. Just looking at the semiconductor facility, for example, in your province, that sends so much of it back to the U.S., that's going to drive up costs there. But look, I know job one is to avoid the tariffs, and I know you say you want to be able to convince the Americans of the wrongness of this and the importance of keeping trade flowing, but should it fail, and should Donald Trump go ahead with this? We spoke with David McNaughton earlier, and he said, you don't tell a bully you're going to punch them in the nose well in advance, but does Canada need to be prepared to do retaliatory tariffs if the incoming president does this?
I think it's too early to have those discussions, but of course, any self-respecting sovereign nation would have to have a plan. So that's my expectation. But honestly, I don't think we're there yet. I think the reason why our American friends have signaled their intentions ahead of time is they want to see how serious we're willing to be to have a discussion with them. And so I see this as an opportunity that needs to be seized, not an opportunity to up the ante.
Right. Well, he's certainly getting reaction, and he's not even in office. He's caused a bit of a frenzy here and in Mexico. Quebec Minister for the Economy, Christopher Skeete, it was good to meet you, sir. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me, David.